Hello, welcome everyone to our second in the series of Putting into Practice Land Rights and Responsibilities webinar series. This one we're actually focusing on land ownership by private trusts and charities. It's great to see so many of you joining us today. So today I'll just quickly go through a few housekeeping points. My name is Kirsty Tate and I'm a good practice advisor with the Land Commission, and I'll just hand over quickly to my colleagues Gemma and Helen to introduce themselves.
Hello, I'm Gemma. I'm the Good Practice Manager at the Land Commission.
Hi, I'm Helen. I'm a Good Practice Advisor at the Land Commission. I'll be in the background today hosting and keeping an eye on your questions as they're coming in.
Okay, some very brief housekeeping points. We will be recording this webinar and it will be made available on our YouTube channel shortly after today. Our first webinar is actually up on our YouTube channel, so you can look and find out a bit more about community engagement and transparency. We have a question and answer function today. Very keen for you to pose your questions throughout, and we'll do our very best to answer as many as possible. As my colleague Helen said, she'll be managing this, so do keep posting questions throughout. We'll also be writing all of these up and sharing them with you all in a report after this webinar. Your feedback's really important to us. A short feedback form should appear on your screens when this webinar closes, and you'll also it will also be emailed to you tomorrow. So please do take the time, just a few minutes, to complete this and send these back. We really appreciate it. Also, if you want to post on Twitter, we've got a really catchy hashtag, hashtag Land Rights and Responsibilities. Between us all, we cannot find one that makes sense and is quite short. So yeah, please do use it. Helen will maybe copy and paste it onto our question, answer and chat function, so you can just copy and paste it yourselves. So today, what we're going to find out a bit more about you. I think we now have 77 of you joining us. So Helen's going to post up a quick poll. She'll introduce it, post it up. Please respond and we'll find out a bit more about where you're all from and why you're attending this webinar.
Thanks, Kirsty. Yes, I'm just going to open up the poll and you should get that popping up on your screens now. And if you could just very quickly tell us which region of Scotland you are from and your reasons for attending the webinar today. I'm just going to leave that there for another minute because I can see everybody's busy popping their answers into those. Just one or two more still coming in. Okay, I think that's just about all of you that have voted now. So I will end that and share the results with you so you can see who's here. So really interesting, actually. We've got a good mix in terms of geography, a real mix. I mean, we have 22% from Highlands and Islands, slightly ahead of the other areas. We find that tends to be the case for most of our sessions. We have a really good attendance from Highlands and Islands, but actually really well spread across Scotland, which is great for us. Really pleased to see that, because this, what we're going to be talking about over these webinars, applies over all sectors and in all areas of Scotland. And 12% who are national or more than one region, which will probably be those of you who are from organisations that cover a number of local authority areas or are Scotland-wide. Reasons for attending the webinar are quite mixed. Some of you are interested in land reform. I hope all of you are interested in land reform, because that's what we do, and this is the place to come and find out about it. A lot of you working with people who own land and want to learn more, and again, from our previous webinar, we know a lot of you are really keen to keep up your CPD and to keep on top of things so you can advise your clients properly and advise people you're working with properly. But we know from our registration as well, we have quite a lot of you who are trustees and sit on trusts or charities, and that's really important as well, because a number of us in the organisation sit on trusts and charitable boards ourselves, and we know how important it is to keep up to date with the governance aspects of all this, as well as all the other decisions that you have to make. So that's great that you've been able to come along and see us. We know we have some colleagues here from OSCA and from colleagues from the different organisations who run our advisory group, who've helped us to put these protocols together and given us important feedback during the development stage of this. So really, really pleased to see you all here. Thank you for your input and welcome to everybody who's here. So I will hand back now to Kirsty and she can take you through the programme for this afternoon. Thanks.
Thanks, Helen. So the programme today, what we're going to cover, we're going to give you an introduction to the Land Rights and Responsibilities Statement and our Good Practice programme. We're going to give you an overview of the two specific protocols of this webinar, land ownership by private trusts and land ownership by charities. And we'll have both accompanied by 10-minute question and answer sessions. We'll then give a quick brief overview of our land rights and responsibilities self-assessments and our in-house workshop training offer, and then finally finish with the further dates in this series of other webinars. So let's move on to Land Rights and Responsibilities Statement. The Land Rights and Responsibilities Statement was published by the Scottish Government and is the first of its kind anywhere in the world, and it sets out a vision for a strong and dynamic relationship between Scotland's land and its people. The decisions we make about land ownership, use and management are central to some of the key challenges we face, including social and economic inequality and the climate emergency, and right now, as we're all highly aware, our country's post-pandemic recovery and renewal. This is really about realising the rights of everyone in relation to land, not just property rights, and the responsibilities that come for all of us with these land rights. Land rights and responsibilities are about owning, managing and using land in a fair and just way that benefits everyone in Scotland. Realising and applying these can reduce inequality and bring mutual benefit to landowners, land managers and communities. So the statement is made up of 6 mutually supportive principles, and these principles underpin our work at the Commission and provide us with a legislative context in supporting change and good practice in the way that our land is owned and used. These rights and responsibilities, as Helen said, apply to both urban and rural Scotland and cover all different types of owners of land, public and private. The key changes sought are that the overall framework of land rights and the responsibilities should promote, fulfil and respect relevant human rights, contribute to public interest and well-being, and balance public and private interest. There should be a greater diversity in ownership of land, including more community ownership, and we'll be focusing on that in our webinar next week. High standards of stewardship of land should be exercised, and high standards and transparency of land ownership and use and better community engagement should be undertaken in decisions about land. So let's move on to tell you a bit about our team and our good practice work programme. Here at the Scottish Land Commission, we have a key role in developing and realising the statement's principles to help drive the culture change that's required to actually implement these and make more of Scotland's land. Our Good Practice programme has been designed to provide a visible and coordinated approach to encourage and enable those with an interest in land to recognise and fulfil their rights and responsibilities in very practical ways. We work with all owners of land, including individuals, companies and trusts, public owners, non-governmental organisations, charities and community owners. And we also work with tenants of any sort where they have control over the land. Our work programme consists of protocols, guidance, advice, land rights responsibilities, self-assessments and training and development. All of this programme is co-produced in partnership with a Good Practice Advisory Group, and membership of this group includes representatives from Community Land Scotland, Development Trust Association Scotland, National Farmers Union Scotland, Scottish Land and Estates, and the Scottish Property Federation and Scottish Environmental Link. We also engage with and involve other organisations where they have particular experience and expertise to draw on. We did this within these protocols and worked with Oscar on the charities protocol. So we do that quite often. We will discuss the land rights responsibility self-assessment and training and development opportunities in more detail later on. So what are the land rights and responsibilities protocols, and why are we taking this approach? These protocols can be used by anyone in Scotland. They set out practical expectations for owners of land, land managers and communities. And we hope they work to support them to work together to make better and fairer decisions about land use. Our aim really is to improve transparency, accountability and governance, and diversity, ownership, management and use of our land. We believe that applying good practice to land rights and responsibilities can bring benefits to all parties involved. Following these protocols provides opportunities for genuine engagement and collaboration, which can reduce potential conflict, help make more parties more resilient, and increase the generation of new ideas and opportunities. I have to say that these are voluntary protocols. However, they offer us, our team, a mechanism to be able to support resolution and hold behaviour to account. Through these protocols, we offer an advice and casework service which supports the implementation of the expectations set out in the protocols. Where appropriate, we provide advice and engage with relevant parties to support improvements in practice and resolution. This process also helps the Commission collate evidence of where further action may be needed to be taken to affect the change needed for land reform. So on the screen, this is the full suite of our protocols to date. Community engagement in relation to land, transparency of ownership and land use decision making. The two protocols we're focusing on today on. Next week, we'll be focusing on diversification of ownership and tenure and negotiating transfer of land to communities. And our final one on good stewardship of land will be published very shortly, and we will be running a webinar on that on the 1st of September.
I'm going to talk first of all about our protocol on land ownership by private trusts, and then on our protocol on land ownership by charities. So to kick off with trusts, I'll just explain a bit about the work we've been doing on trusts in the Commission. This is an issue that we were asked to look at by Scottish ministers, and they asked us to take a look at trusts and consider any potential impacts for public interest. I think sometimes there can be a lack of understanding around trusts and maybe a perception that they're less transparent, or because of the lack of understanding that people think there's something wrong with them. But we do know, they are a perfectly normal structure for people to use in land ownership. So the 4 areas that we looked at in terms of public interest in particular were the impact on the potential for community land acquisition, either through a right to buy process or through a negotiated sale. We looked at whether trust status is a barrier to community engagement, how trust status affects land use decision making and the ability to respond to changing contexts, and what the public benefit implications are of tax relief associated with trust status. So we commissioned a report on this with Harper MacLeod, which helped inform us about the direction we would take with this work. And we subsequently produced a land focus paper on this. This is available on our website, and the aim of the land focus paper was really to enhance understanding and to give clarity around some of the issues to help people to know a bit more about trusts and how they operate and what they're used for. But ultimately, in the report, we found there's nothing inherent in trust structure that would prevent the sale of land or engagement or transparency, but that what's likely to happen is it might be a cultural issue. It's something that it's maybe not how trusts have operated normally, so there might be a bit of fear on the part of trustees of taking things in that direction. So we decided to produce this protocol, and the protocol applies to all private trusts that own land or buildings in Scotland, and that includes discretionary trusts, interest in possession trusts, bare trusts, and accumulation and maintenance trusts. And trusts are, of course, governed by legislation. The main legislation that governs them are the Trust Acts, Scotland, 1921 and 1961, along with common law. The Scottish Law Commission has produced a series of documents about trusts, and they have drafted a trusts bill looking to modernise the legislation. We don't know when Scottish Government are going to adopt that. There's nothing timetabled in Parliament for it, but there is action being taken to look at bringing the structure a little bit more up to date. And this protocol in particular supports principles 1, 3 and 5 of the Land Rights and Responsibility Statement. So that's the principles on human rights, on community ownership and on transparency. So I'll talk you through the expectations that we've set out in this protocol now. So firstly, the up-to-date information about trustees, the extent of the land holding and a main point of contact should be publicly available. We did produce a template document with our transparency protocol that we published a few months ago, and that's quite a helpful way of setting out that information for communities and for people who might want to know a bit more about your land holding and about who's involved. We set out an expectation that if a trust is planning changes which will affect the local community, then genuine community engagement is expected, and that would be in line with our protocol on engaging with communities in decisions relating to land. And we recommend regular review of governance skills and knowledge, and we appreciate that this will quite often be a regular part of trust business, considering how you operate, who's involved, and whether you have the skills and the knowledge to take things forward. And then onto the second slide of expectations. Our protocol sets out that trusts should consider knowledge of the local area and community in their trustee appointments and look at options for local representation. That's just to ensure that in an area where land is held, that the priorities and the needs of the local community are taken into account in terms of land use and management. And we recommend that you consider the ways in which the trust can work with the community and help to meet their priorities. We know that it might not always be possible to have a local person on the board of as a trustee. It could be that the trust owns land in several different locations, and that would make that impractical. But there are other ways, such as having a working group or a forum where you can seek the views of the community and involve them in what you're doing. And finally, that consideration is given to approaches from community organisations for opportunities to own, use or lease land, and that in that there is transparency in decision making, that if you're making a decision, you let communities know the kind of rationale behind it, particularly if you're saying no to something. So that will take us on to the Q&A. So I will bring Helen in, and Helen will let us know if we've had any questions.
Hi Gemma, thanks for that. We haven't had any questions yet on our Q&A box, but we have had a few questions that people sent to us when they were registering, which are about trusts. So I'll start with those, and anybody else that has any questions, do please feel free to pop them into the Q&A box and we can pick those up as we're going along. So we had a question, Gemma, about what the best practice is for appointing trustees. You touched on that a little bit there, but is there any particularly good practice for trusts that are thinking about how to appoint trustees to their organisations?
Yeah, we do have that expectation in the protocol that trusts should consider whether the trustees have sufficient knowledge of the local area where they hold land. So we're not prescriptive about how a trust would appoint trustees. It is something that will be done on a case-by-case basis and will depend a lot on the trust in question. But I think in general, it's a good idea to carry out a skills analysis to be really aware of the knowledge and the skills and the experience that your existing trustees have, and to identify if you've got any gaps in knowledge and how you might best fill that, whether that's through professional advice or whether it's through appointing a trustee who has particular skills. So it's it's something where you could advertise openly and be quite specific in your advert that you're looking for someone with certain skills. You can approach certain bodies or organizations if particular skills are required. You might have a particular body for, say, accounting or legal advice. They might be able to help you identify people. Local volunteer services are a really good source of finding people in the local area who are willing and have the time to volunteer. And it's important to make sure that what you do works for your organisation. You know, it could be something that you work with your professional advisors to consider what you're doing, and look to them for support in finding and appointing trustees.
Thanks for that. Annie's just asked us a question which is along the same lines about whether we have any good examples about where landowning trusts have appointed trustees that represent the local community, and what the opportunities or barriers might be to appointing local representatives.
Sure. I'm trying to think off the top of my head if I can come up with a trust who has done that. I'm certainly where we've got a charitable trust like in Bute, Mount Stewart Trust have a working group, and they work with say local farmers on particular issues that are relevant to them. In terms of the opportunities and barriers to appointing local representatives, the opportunities are really around getting that knowledge and that experience, getting somebody with the relevant contacts in the area and who has a really good understanding of the strengths and weaknesses in the area, what the opportunities are, and how the trust might be able to work more closely with the local community for mutual benefit. In terms of barriers, as I've mentioned with the research we've done, it's quite often a cultural issue. It's not the done thing. There might be established ways in which a trust finds people through their own networks, or getting recommendations that might not fit with appointing local representatives. But generally, I think if there's anything in the trust deed that's very specific about who can sit on a trust, that would be kind of a key barrier. But as I've mentioned, there are other ways to involve local people.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Gemma. Kirsty, I'll maybe ask this one to you that's come from Debbie about whether there are any situations where trustees from a small community might struggle to be independent, taking into account the other responsibilities that they would have as a trustee for the organisation.
I'm happy to come back in on that. I think any organisation, whether it's a private trust or a charity, should have robust procedures in place to deal with any conflicts of interest. And obviously, it's imperative that a trustee act in the best interests of the trust. That's part of the legislation, that it's their role to do that. So I would expect that that's something that would be dealt with through conflicts of interest procedures, as it would be with any other trustee.
That's great. Thanks, Gemma. I'm going to come back to another of the questions that we got asked before the registration, which was about how we can assess if trustees have enough knowledge of and connection to the community in an area where the trustee owns land. And Kirsty, I think you maybe want to pick that one up.
Yeah, thanks, Helen. So this is a particular one. It's that we do get asked quite a lot, and it's really, I think you should consider what contact and relationships trustees have with the local community and whether they know what the local aspirations and issues are. This is very much establishing and building relationships, and this is paramount, the kind of base of helping you understand your community's needs and priorities. So as Gemma said, there's lots of different ways you can do this, and you can do it by speaking to your local groups, hosting or attending engagement events or public meetings, or setting up a working group, as Gemma said, like Mount Stewart, with local representatives. And we've got loads of guidance, advice, best practice studies, tools, etc., in our community engagement section. So please do have a look at that and watch our last webinar as well. there's lots to help you to actually support and enable you to find out more about your community's needs and aspirations. So I'm moving on to maybe complaints. Consider whether you receive or hear complaints from the community about lack of information and engagement as well. And if so, if you do, consider the nature of these complaints and look at how you can improve your communications or whether other additional processes can be put in place. And you should also consider what contact you have with the community about local development. Always look for ways to involve your trustees and your directly in your community engagement activities. Be visible, be transparent, and it's fantastic if an actual representative from your charity or trust can attend some meetings and events. So yeah, I mean, I think there's lots of ways you can enable your trustees to gain a knowledge of and connection to the community in which you operate. And it's not just best practice for private trusts and charities. It's best practice for all types of landowners, public or private.
Okay, thanks, Kirsty. I'm just going to pick up one more question we've got a few coming through now, and we should say any questions that we don't manage to answer today, we will pick these up and answer them in a report. We'll include all the Q&As in a report that we'll send out after the webinar. But I'll just pick one more up that Gemma, I think you might be able to answer. Duncan's asked us about the way trusts are set up. For example, a private trust might be established for taxation and succession benefits, but might that then make it difficult for the community to engage? Are there issues with the way that have we found issues with the way that trusts are set up that might make it either more difficult or easier for them to engage with their community?
Sure. I mean, there are a few reasons why people might look to set up a private trust, and there are a few different kinds of trusts I mentioned already that they could use to do that. So, I mean, conventionally, it tends to be that assets are being held for a beneficiary with a view that they would take ownership of the assets in the future. So, that's something that it might be a trust that when somebody comes of a certain age that they would get access to the assets in the trust. And it can be about protecting assets for future beneficiaries. In cases like that, it might be that you know, if it's for succession and it's for inheritance purposes, that it might make it difficult because the trustees will be doing what they're doing with the interest of the beneficiary in mind. That might make it more difficult to do something like sell land. But in terms of ownership and management of land, and in terms of courtesy and being a good neighbour, there's nothing really that would prevent a trust from engaging with the community, from building up good relationships with those around them. And we've got a lot more information on that in the Land Focus paper that I mentioned, so you might want to check out that paper on our website, and that will go into a little bit more detail.
Okay, that's great, Gemma. Thanks. And again, we'll maybe include links after the webinar when we're sending information out to people. Send links to that to the paper there, and also a report that was done about the different types of land holdings and trusts that goes into some of the more technical legal details and sets some of that out. So we'll send those links through. So that's great. Some really good questions coming through there, but I'm going to hand back to Gemma now, and we're going to continue talking about our protocol for charities, and then we'll come back and have some more questions after that. Thanks.
Yes, so along with our protocol on land ownership by private trusts, we've developed our protocol on land ownership by charities. Land ownership by charities, I think, is an issue that's been discussed for quite some time, something that was picked up by the Land Reform Review Group some years ago. And really the purpose of this is to invite landowning charities to think about how they can reflect land rights and responsibilities in how they operate and make decisions. Now, obviously, there's legislation in this case as well, the Charity and Trustee Investment Scotland Act 2005, and there is a regulator in the sector. Helen's already mentioned that Oscar helped us out with the development of this protocol, so I think we might have a few folk from Oscar on the webinar, and just to say thank you very much to them for all of their feedback and support. Really helpful working with them, and it was really valuable input. So it's something like we say on the slide there, charity trustees have got to act in accordance with their governing document and with trustee legal duties, and that's something similar to trusts that, you know, we do appreciate that there are certain duties that have to be met, and that the expectations we are setting out are there to complement those, and if there was anything in the governing document that prevented those from being taken forward, then that's perfectly valid. So in terms of the charity protocol, you know, charitable status is a status that recognises a contribution to society. There are also legal requirements. So charities have to demonstrate how they meet their legal requirements throughout the life of the charity, and they do receive some benefit through that status. So in terms of the expectations, I'll move on now to the next slide. So up-to-date information about trustees, the extent of land holding, and a main point of contact should be publicly available. This is in line with our transparency protocol and with the protocol on private trusts. Now, the Oscar website is great. It's got the Scottish Charity Register there, and you can search for charities. So that will give you the information about the organisation itself and a correspondence address. But Oscar doesn't keep a register of charity trustees. There's no obligation for them to do so, and it would be a massive undertaking to maintain that. So it is something we recommend that charities do on a voluntary basis, and a lot do. You see fantastic examples on websites where charities will share information about their boards and how you can get in contact with them. Again, we have an expectation around transparency of the land held, the activities that are undertaken, and the public benefit provided. Some of this information, again, can be found on the Scottish Charity Register. Under the 2005 Act, you do have the right to request the following information from a charity, and that is their latest statement of accounts and a copy of the charity's constitution, and that will set out the purposes of the charity. We recommend that community engagement plans are prepared and delivered by landowning charities, and we have some guidance available which is on the pages about community engagement on our website. That's something that was prepared alongside our protocol on community engagement in decisions relating to land. We recommend that consideration is given to the alignment of operational strategies with community priorities. I've already touched on charitable purposes. There are set charitable purposes, and charities must act to meet those purposes. So there are some of those purposes that are more aligned with the kind of information that you'll find in the Land Rights and Responsibility Statement, and where it's appropriate for the activities that a charity carries out, then it would be a good idea to reflect those in the purposes of the charity. We also ask that consideration is given, sorry, I've just covered that point on reflection of the land rights and responsibilities. Again, regular review of governance skills and knowledge is really helpful. And it is something that's picked up. Oscar have got some great guidance on their website. They cover some of the things we were talking about earlier about appointment of trustees. They cover how you should do that and having an induction process and regular training. So do check out Oscar's website. Again, we recommend consideration of knowledge of the local area and community being given when you're making trustee appointments. And we also have an expectation there around the diversification of land ownership and tenure, and that's giving consideration to reasonable proactive approaches from the local community when they're looking to purchase or use land. And that's something we'll pick up in a lot more detail next week when we have our webinar on diversification. So that is a very quick run through of what we're doing for charities. So happy to pick up any questions here.
Okay, thanks for that, Gemma. That was great. We do have a question for you, and it relates to both the protocols that you've talked to us about so far, I think, and it's a question that came in early, asking about what status these protocols have in relation to other duties that trustees or people sitting on charitable boards might have.
Sure, yeah, as I've mentioned there, charity trustees do have a legal duty to act in line with the Charities and Trustees Investment Scotland Act. And if they're registered in England or Wales, there's the Charity Act 2011, and there are other regulators who they can have contact with, and the emphasis is really on meeting the requirements of their governing document, and it's the same with private trusts. Really the trustees have to act in the interests of the beneficiary and in line with what is set out in the deed of trust that's been put in place to establish the trust. So the protocol doesn't take away at all from those legal duties. Really what we're seeking to do is complement that in a positive way, provide a bit of clarity of expectation and around how trusts and charities can deliver land rights and responsibilities, you know, ultimately by being transparent, by building better relationships with local communities. And we do expect everyone covered by the protocol to meet the expectations, as long as that is in line with their trustee and their trustee duties.
Thanks for that, Gemma. We had a question earlier from Stephen about whether trusts can be registered out with Scotland. I guess the same would apply to charities, and I think you've just answered that yes, they can be, but they might have additional regulatory requirements. Yes,
yeah, they can be registered outside Scotland. We don't have any kind of restriction on land ownership from organisations or people out with Scotland. So a private trust, you know, it's a legal document, so it could be that that legal document is registered in England or Wales. Okay, thanks for that, Gemma. Kirsty, I'm going to ask you a question that came in earlier as well. Gemma mentioned there about the expectation for community engagement plans, and we had a question sent in from a national organisation with land and property in lots of different locations. So they're wondering if they're expected to have a community engagement plan for all of them.
Okay, really, this is all about what's appropriate and what's proportionate. So all charities and trusts should choose the means of engagement that is appropriate to their context. For example, an organisation might have an overarching engagement plan that covers all of its property and which references how communities will be engaged with locally. Really, the most important thing here for all landowners, not just private trusts and charities, is that engagement should be proportionate to the impact that their decisions have on the community. It shouldn't be disproportionate to either the organisation involved, the landowning organisation involved, its managers, or the community. So flowing from this, appropriate and accessible methods of communication should be used. So really it is about the local context, it's about your organisation's context and what's proportionate, what's appropriate. As Gemma said, we have produced quite in-depth guidance on how you develop these engagement plans. So please, again, visit our website, look under the community engagement section, or contact us directly to find out more, and we can actually help support organisations or individuals to develop these and implement them.
Okay, thanks, Kirsty. And I'll maybe stay with you because we've just had a question here from Duncan who's asking, most community bodies such as SCIOs will have a charitable status. If they own land, does this guidance apply to them, or is it just the more obvious larger landholding charities that this applies to?
As I said at the beginning, these protocols, our work, cover all types of landowners, public, private, and all different scenarios and structures. So really our whole body of work is to support landowners and communities of all kinds across Scotland. So yes, we would say that all of our protocols, including these two, cover all different kinds, including skills.
That's
And
great. Thanks,
yeah,
thanks, Kirsty. And I think Gemma's one.
Yeah, I'll just jump in there and just say, obviously Duncan's asked about skills, but they do apply to all charities that own land and buildings in Scotland, and that includes charitable trusts, it includes skills, and includes charities that are set up by Royal Charter or by Act of Parliament. You know, that's obviously the larger landowning ones, but it is any charity, any charitable organisation who owns land in Scotland.
Thank you. Thank you, Gemma, for that clarification. I'm going to go back to a question that we had from Ross when you were talking about trusts, but I think it applies here as well, about the challenges of failure, what the main challenges from failure have been, and whether we're aware of any peer review type structures. Do you know where people might get some help with these sorts of expectations, or help in avoiding failure and reviewing what they're doing?
In terms of recent challenges, I think a lot of the issues on the trust side are around perception, but there is anecdotal evidence that sometimes it can be used as a bit of an excuse for saying no, and for maybe not being so transparent. You know, one of the issues we looked at was whether there was a potential impact on community land acquisition, either, you know, possibly through a right to buy process. And that's something, there have been, I think, almost 250 applications under Part 2 community right to buy, and around 12 of those were land that was held by trusts. None of those have gone ahead. Obviously, it's a very, very small sample, so we can't say whether that's a much broader issue, but there are indications there that it might be something that doesn't go ahead. In the paper that we commissioned by Harper and McLeod, there was a bit of evidence there to suggest that the reason it might not go ahead is that trusts don't tend to proactively sell land, and a Part 2 application does require a willing seller, and it might be an issue that trusts don't actively look to sell land. In terms of peer review type processes, I'm not 100% sure on this, but I think there are some really good peer networks and regional groupings in different membership organisations. So something like Scottish Land and Estates have regional groupings, and they might be a really useful place to go to get that kind of peer support. And again, it's something that professional advisors might be able to point you towards, and the kind of thing that networking and conferences are really, really helpful for.
Thanks, Gemma. And I guess as well, it's worth pointing back to our colleagues at OSCA who are here today as well. I know there's, because I was looking at it myself recently in my own capacity, there's lots of really, really helpful information on their website, and Scottish Council for Voluntary Organisations have lots of useful information as well. So there are places that people can go to, as well as various membership organisations. I've got a question that's come from Chris, asking if we can say a little bit more about community, or advocate a representative body that landowners could approach to ascertain what the important community priorities are for them. And Gemma, I think you might be wanting to pick that one up.
Sure, yeah. We do actually define in our protocols who the protocol applies to. So in terms of community organisations, we define the groups as community councils who represent the area in which the land is, or relevant constituted community organisations who have open membership and who demonstrate community control and represent a defined geographic area. So they would be the main bodies really who landowners would approach to find out about community priorities and desires and plans. And it is actually worth flagging that we are working on an information map. We're working on a couple of information maps, one for communities that will set out how they can go about finding information about land, and one for landowners that will support them with finding out information about their community and community priorities. So we're hoping that they'll be published probably in the next month or so. So that would be a kind of step-by-step kind of visual guide, something that's just there to help landowners and communities. But it is, like you say, community councils, and as we've set out, community bodies like a development trust or a community landowner, or kind of even a residents group, someone with a kind of local view would be the best place. That would be the best way to find out about priorities, desires and plans.
That's great, Gemma, thanks. And again, there'll be information in our community engagement resources that we talked a little bit more about last week. There's one more question, last one on charities that's come in here on the board from Murray, asking to what extent public bodies such as Scottish Forestry will be taking the protocol into account when assessing grant applications or assessing new management plans. Have we any feedback from public body organisations about how they'll be approaching this yet?
We haven't got direct feedback from the organisations, but it is worth pointing out that the statement does apply to public bodies in the same way that it applies to private landowners and community landowners. So it is something we are actively working with different organisations to encourage them to take on our protocols and to do a bit more with the land rights and responsibility statement. And in terms of assessing grant applications and management plans, I don't think there is anything specific in them at the moment, but that is something that we're very much aware of and will be looking at as we take this work forward.
That's great. Thanks, Gemma. And that's all the questions we've had in today. So well done. We've managed to cover all of them. So I'll hand back to Kirsty now, who will take you through the last part of this afternoon's programme. Thank you.
So yes, we have 10 more minutes. So I'm going to quickly go through the opportunities that we have at through our Good Practice programme and team at the moment. So land rights and responsibility self-assessments, I've mentioned them briefly early on in the webinar. In 2019, in 2019, the Commission carried out one of the most substantial investigations into the impacts of scale and concentration of rural land ownership. And from this investigation, initial recommendations have been made to the Scottish Government to address some of the issues identified. One of these recommendations was the introduction of a statutory review to ensure accountability of land holdings in relation to the Land Rights and Responsibility Statement. Ministers have agreed with us that we should do further work to try and develop how such reviews could be taken forward. So, through our team, we have developed a voluntary land rights and responsibilities self-assessment framework, and we've developed this to help anyone who makes significant decisions about the way land or buildings are used or managed, both rural and urban, to assess how they contribute to the land rights and responsibility statement and our protocols that support them. We're already working with several landowners across Scotland, both public, private, individual, organisation, but are really keen to get as wide a selection as possible for this to help us test this framework. We believe that they can offer a great opportunity to evaluate your own operations and governance, to identify good practice that can be shared with other landowners, identify areas of improvement, but also provide us with feedback and influence on how this work is going to be taken forward. So please, if you are interested, do get in touch, either through the feedback form that we'll send you after this, or get in touch with us directly and we can discuss the framework with you and in more detail and what it involves. So the other opportunity that we're offering at the moment is in-house workshops. These are free tailored workshops for interested organisations. Before the pandemic hit, we ran several of these face-to-face with land agents across Scotland, and we recognised how beneficial it is just taking some time out to reflect on what this good practice is, which comes from following the Land Rights and Responsibilities Statement. So these workshops will be designed with you, and we can offer the following: an overview of the Commission's wider work. We are one part of the Land Commission's work, and there's so much more involved that we can go over and through with you depending on what you're interested in. An overview of the whole Land Rights and Responsibilities Protocol series, and detailed discussion of any kind of area of interest or protocol that is relevant to you. So again, get in contact if you're interested in running one of these with us. Moving on to the next dates in our webinar series, it's great to see so many of you joining us. Next week, as we said, we'll be focusing on our protocols on diversification of ownership and tenure and negotiating transfer of land to communities. Then the week after that, we'll introduce our protocol on good stewardship of land. To register and to listen to previous protocol webinars, just visit our webpage. So finally, I just want to say a huge thank you for joining myself and my good practice team colleagues today. We hope you found this webinar informative and useful. As I said, your feedback is extremely important to us, so please do complete the short form which will be sent to you after this webinar. Again, please get in contact if you have any queries or you require more information or you're interested in our opportunities. Our contact details are here on in the slides. It's been a great pleasure presenting today, and just want to wish you all the best of luck on your land rights and responsibilities journeys. As I said, we'll be producing a report after this webinar which will cover all your questions and signpost you to all the relevant links that we've mentioned throughout this. So thank you very much, and we'll see some of you maybe next week. Okay, thank you.
Thanks.